Welcome back. We are continuing to follow the arguments at the Supreme Court over whether lower courts have the power to block President Trump's order to limit birthright citizenship nationwide. We're going to get you right back to those arguments in just a moment. But first, I want to get some reaction and some analysis from around the table here. Here with us is Lisa Rubin, Chuck Rosenberg, Catherine Christian, and Paula Ramos. Chuck, just based on what we've heard so far, where do you see the justices leaning?
You know, I think this might seem confusing to people at home, but I might be able to simplify it a bit. The court is struggling with the best way to decide complicated cases efficiently, uniformly, and accurately. Do you allow one judge in one district to make a rule that binds everyone, or do you require this to be litigated everywhere by everyone? One may give you a more accurate and a more traditional path to an answer. One gives you a quicker path to an answer. And that's what seems to be at issue here. The unconstitutionality of Mr. Trump's birthright citizenship executive order seems reasonably clear. The question is, Anna, how do you resolve it now?
Yeah, and we actually heard the justices ask that of the lawyers. Like, how do you ever bring the merits of this case before us? Because that's not technically what they're supposed to be deciding here, although perhaps they could. Lisa, what did you hear there? We did hear, for example, Sotomayor mention precedent, court precedent.
Yes, and she mentioned specifically on 4 cases that she says stand for the proposition that children born in the United States, even to non-citizens, are granted citizenship under the Citizenship Clause of the 14th Amendment. But there's one other thing that I heard here that I thought bared on the issue that Chuck was raising about whether you allow things to percolate through the traditional appellate route or whether you resolve them quickly, particularly whereas here the precedent is so clear and the lawlessness of what has gone on seems to have broad consensus around it. I heard the Solicitor General say in response to a question by Justice Barrett, if a circuit court, one of the federal appeals courts, makes a judgment here, will you abide by that within that circuit? And the answer was not a uniform yes. It was generally. And that may push some of the justices here toward the specter of universal injunctions only as a way to get that uniformity, because if the Department of Justice isn't willing to say they will always abide by the rulings of individual circuit courts, meaning the federal appeals courts, then what can you do to guarantee uniformity? Again, particularly whereas here the lawlessness of the executive order seems clear to them. You might have to allow those universal injunctions to stay if that's what you really are hoping for.
And Paula, at the heart of this case are families' lives and individuals here. I know you've been talking to migrant families about what they see is on the line here. I mean, we're talking about the president of the United States trying to end birthright citizenship for children who are born in the U.S. to undocumented migrants.
Exactly. I mean, the one thing I keep thinking about is if they get what they want, what does that look like? And it looks like chaos on the ground. No, it looks like this country essentially unleashing a humanitarian crisis within our borders. What does that mean? It means that we will see an amount of people that will literally be stateless, suddenly perhaps not belonging in one state, not even belonging in their homelands. Now, who is to say that dictators in Venezuela or in Cuba would even take them as their own, given that many of their parents are fleeing these regimes? We're talking about countless mixed status families that perhaps would suddenly not have the means not to access lawyers or the money to access what they need in order to be able to challenge their cases. We're talking about fear. And then more than anything, and I think we're talking about this question that immigrants do not even fathom as they're trying to come to this country, which is this idea that suddenly someone like Donald Trump or an individual judge can suddenly decide who belongs and who doesn't belong in this country. And that is the essence of immigration to this country. So to be even having this conversation is, I think, pretty dark.
One of the key moments that stands out to me, Catherine, that we've been listening to is when Justice Jackson said, your argument, talking to John Sauer, turns the justice system into a catch-me-if-you-can regime. And she says, from the standpoint of the executive, where everybody has to have a lawyer in order to file a lawsuit for the government to stop violating people's rights. Are we talking about a system of justice that works for everyone here?
Well, Justice Jackson was correct. And to quote the New Jersey Solicitor General, he keeps repeating it, you're going to have citizenship that turns on and off as you cross state lines. And we know that most people cannot afford the best lawyers, and particularly, as you said, immigrants who don't even know that they have an option of seeking help. So that was a key phrase, on and off as you cross state lines, if you don't have the universal injunction. And as Lisa said was correct, I think Justice Barrett sort of put the U.S. Solicitor General in a corner, because he would not really acknowledge that if the Second Circuit Court of Appeals, that's New York, Vermont, Connecticut, issued a decision that the Trump administration didn't like, would they follow it? He could not definitively state that he would. And that may give pause to other justices who might say, you know what, I was going to rule this way, but maybe I won't.